Let's bring in former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. He's also a fellow at the Wilson Center. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're going to speak with you about what we're going to see here in just a moment, the historic nature of something like this. First, though, with you in your position, I'd like to start with your reaction to the return of the remaining living Israeli hostages this morning, all 20. The Red Cross, we're learning, is also currently on its way to a meeting point in the southern Gaza Strip where several coffins of deceased hostages will be transferred into their custody. What does this moment mean to you and to the Israeli people?
Well, good. Thank you. Thank you for hosting me. It's an extraordinary moment, and it's almost difficult for me to talk. I'm so moved by this moment. And what this means for Israelis, it's sometimes difficult to convey this to other audiences, certainly in the United States, what hostages mean for Israeli society. It's deeply ingrained in our holy texts, in the Torah and the Talmud, that the Jewish people have to do everything possible to redeem captives. And this was essential for this country, even taking extraordinary risks, releasing 250 convicted murderers from our prison, and we know that these murderers go back. 80% of them in the past have gone back to being members of terrorist organizations who have in turn killed Israelis. Israelis know this. They know the price, and they know the risks involved, and still, they're willing to pay those price and take those risks in order to redeem these hostages, to see them reunited with their families. It's also difficult for people outside of Israel to understand the need to redeem the hostages who are no longer living, to reunite them with their families for proper burial in the state of Israel. There are soldiers who have been missing from previous wars, and their absence from their families, the inability of those families to have closure, is an open wound in Israeli society. So the fact that Hamas has not returned the vast majority of the deceased hostages is going to be an issue moving forward. But having said this, this is an extraordinary day with immense possibilities for the future, for Israel, for the Palestinians, and the entire Middle East. This could truly be a transformative moment.
Let's talk more about the U.S. relationship with the Middle East. Clearly, right now, the U.S. and Israel have a strong alliance. President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu are very close. But President Trump also clearly has some strong relationships with other nations in the Middle East. Historically speaking, put that into context for us, what the U.S. relationships are like right now in the Middle East and what that means for the prospects of peace moving forward.
Well, the success of the President Trump and his 20 points are the result of two benefits that have been underplayed or underestimated by previous administrations. And they are these. First of all, the use of military power. Certainly in the last decade, Democrats and Republicans in this country have sort of vied with one another to say which could be more isolationist, which could withdraw from the Middle East, certainly militarily, most completely. And here President Trump comes and reasserts American military power in the Middle East, first against Yemen, then against Iran, most emphatically, and basically revised the Pax Americana in the Middle East, which had almost disappeared. And so in the Middle East, strength is very much respected. They respect the quote-unquote strong horse and not the weak horse. Trump is perceived as a strong horse, and that gave him tremendous diplomatic leverage. In addition, diplomacy, like so many other aspects of life, are based on personal relationships. And Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the principal emissaries of the president, established close personal working relations with virtually every leader in the Middle East, including leaders that don't get along with one another, much less with the state of Israel. And we're able to bring them all together into the 20 points and to create this moment. And in contrast to much of what's been written certainly in the mainstream media in the United States, that the 20 points were the result of pressure put on Netanyahu by President Trump, it's really on the contrary. The two enjoyed a very, very close relationship. It wasn't without its bumps and without its crisis points. But the fact of the matter is, it was the closeness, it was the intimacy, it was the trust that had been built up between these two leaders that enabled the Prime Minister Netanyahu to take some difficult decisions. For example, the possibility of discussing a future Palestinian state, which is in the 20 points. His government doesn't like that, but he agreed to it because he trusts Donald Trump. And so that there's leverage. There was the ability to forge this agreement for these disparate leaders and to get us perhaps to a different point. Now, of course, the game is not over. We have the subsequent phases, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But much stands to be gained should these 20 points be implemented.
What do you make of Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to not attend this summit today in Egypt?
He had no choice. That's the fact of it. It's a Jewish holiday. This is one of those Jewish holidays where you don't turn out a light, you don't get into a car, and you certainly don't go into an airplane to go and attend a summit. One would have thought that maybe they could have moved that summit another day. I don't know. But the prime minister of the Jewish state could not make this trip.
You said we'll talk about the subsequent phases. Let's talk about the subsequent phases here. What do you think is the most important thing, the next most important steps that need to happen?
Well, the 20 points address the reconstruction of Gaza. They talk about the future of the West Bank as well. They talk about enlisting other countries, both in the Middle East and outside the Middle East, in the Abraham Accords. Many goals. It all hinges on one step, and that is demilitarization, disarmament. It's getting Hamas to give up its guns. Because there can be an international force that's ready to go into Gaza to start the reconstruction of Gaza. No country is going to send its troops into, or even its diplomats or its technocrats into Gaza if Hamas has guns. No one's going to be willing to die for Gaza, and that's the reality of it. And there won't be investment, and what Gaza desperately needs. So it's getting Hamas to give up those guns, and that is a major hurdle because Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's like asking Al Qaeda and ISIS to give up its guns. Those guns are part of Hamas's DNA. And what even was the question is Hamas without guns, is it even Hamas anymore? That doesn't mean it's not insurmountable. Tremendous pressure can be brought to bear on Hamas through its major patrons in Qatar and Turkey. Different ways can be cut off their money, cut off their arms supplies. They can be squeezed. It may take some time.
How do you see something like that being enforced?
Well, for example, before October 7th, 2023, Hamas got a tremendous amount of money from the Qataris. By the way, Israel helped facilitate that, as did the United States, through European organizations that were giving, philanthropically to build hospitals and schools, but Hamas was taking that money and using to build tunnels and bunkers. That's got to stop. The humanitarian aid issue is going to be very sensitive because obviously Gaza needs a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid, but in the past, about 60% of that aid was stolen by Hamas. They used it to feed their own terrorists, but they also then to resell the aid at exorbitant prices on Gaza markets, and Hamas was enriched through that. That process has to end. We have to ensure that the aid actually gets to the people of Gaza and not to Hamas. That will basically starve Hamas out. And there's another factor, which is, I think, underappreciated in the media here, is that there are many people, thousands and thousands of people in Gaza who have deep grudges against Hamas for bringing this destruction on them. There are actually, some of these people are armed. They're part of militias, part of clans that have long opposed Hamas. If I were a Hamas terrorist right now, I'd be scared to walk out in the street.
Ambassador Oren, thank you very much for your time and your expertise this morning.